All right, we're good to go whenever.
All right. What's going on, guys? Welcome to the shop. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the Dynasty Diagnostic Podcast, a part of the Dynasty Trade Calculator family of podcasts and brought to you by Fantasy Data. My name is Eitan Mozia. I am joined, as always, by Sam Stompy Lane. You can follow me on Twitter at ETAN Mozia. Go ahead and follow Sam at FF Stompy. And we are here. We are in week 6. Week 6 is in the books. I guess we're in week 7 now, technically. And it seems like your conversation about Stephon Diggs last week was heard loud and clear. 7 receptions, 167 receiving yards, 3 TDs by himself in a win over Philadelphia. Kirk Cousins also threw a 4th TD to Adam Thielen. Dalvin Cook wasn't heavily used in this game. Was this just an issue of this game's particular game script or this game's particular opponent facing the quote-unquote vaunted Philadelphia secondary? Or is this a case of maybe the guy that screams and bitches and moans actually starts to get some of the attention thrown his way?
I think it's going to be both. It definitely helps that the Vikings faced the Eagles last week. They faced who do they face this week? New York. No, they faced New York the previous week. This week, they have another plus matchup as well. So I think it's a squeaky wheel thing. I also think it's a matchup thing. It'll be interesting to see if this continues forward. I do expect Minnesota to continue to run the ball pretty heavily. But I'm hoping that that 2-game losing streak or the games that they had difficulty moving the ball helped to put in Zimmerman's or Zimmer. It's Mike Zimmer. Damn it. Putting the Zimmer's mind, putting the Kubiak's mind, putting the Stefanski's mind that they do need to throw the ball. They have arguably the best wide receiver duo in the league, and they need to throw the ball. You obviously can't expect 3 touchdowns, 167 yards each week, but 70 yards and a touchdown is not out of the realm of possibility. It'll just be interesting to see how they move forward from last week.
I think this is just the example of the cautionary tale in fantasy football, and that's you never, at least in a dynasty league, you never want to just solely be looking at this season. You have to take in total body of work. You have to take in context when trying to evaluate these players. If you were selling Stephon Diggs just a week before last week's blow-up, I mean, what were you realistically getting back for him? Maybe a first? Is Stephon Diggs worth just a first to you at this point? I mean, he's never really been that for me. I would always want multiple firsts, and this is a guy that has proven that he can perform when given the opportunity. There are so many examples of, I guess, people just getting so frustrated with players, not so far into the season, we're not even halfway through it yet, that they give up on them, and that they're so low, and that they actually have a net loss for their teams. And this is kind of one of the examples of why you want to do everything possible to avoid this line of thinking when trying to construct your teams in dynasty leagues. But yeah, Stephon Diggs, Adam Thielen, not all is lost. I really do think it's just a situation where you need to understand that it's not going to be a smooth ride, but they'll get you there at the end of the day. I really do think that, I mean, both Diggs and Thielen are going to find themselves in the top 15, 18 receivers thereabouts. And I mean, while that's maybe not necessarily what you expected from Diggs after his break into the top 12 wide receivers last year, that's still something that's very, very valuable for your fantasy teams. And it's not like we're on the clock with him in terms of age.
Right. And I think this is, I mean, like you said, a cautionary tale about not reacting, especially in dynasty football. I get it in terms of redraft because you only have the 13 games to get into the playoffs, but it's not like Stephon Diggs' talent just went away. I mean, he's still very young. He's still arguably one of the best, if not the best route runners in the game. Don't react to a bad series of games. It's just not a good exercise, especially in dynasty fantasy football.
The sample size in football is so small that if you have 3 years of data versus just a few games, you really need to put a lot into those 3 years of data that you have previous to that. Else you find yourselves in those situations. But yeah, just understand the sample sizes that we're presented with in football. And it's already small to begin with in a 16-game season. Don't further I guess, close off yourself to trying to see the whole picture after just 6 games into a season. Now we're going to turn to one of the biggest news items to hit the NFL landscape recently. Jalen Ramsey, who has had this ghost back injury for the last 4 weeks and is not suited up for the Jacksonville Jaguars, will now suit up and play for the Los Angeles Rams, traded for 2 first-round picks, and I believe there was even more to that deal. Los Angeles Rams are now thinking that, again, they're just pushing all their chips in the middle of the table to try and win while they can, while they still have this team together as is. But man, Jalen Ramsey switching jerseys, that's not necessarily something I saw coming, even knowing that he wanted to leave just because of the innate value of a lockdown, shutdown, number one, probably the best corner in the game. How did you react to this, Sam?
This trade deadline is the most, I guess, exciting that we've seen in a little bit. I don't know why it was Marcus Peters, though, is the weird thing for me.
He was in the last year of his contract, so.
Well, no, I get it, but it sounds like Aqib Talib is going on IR. They really could have used Marcus Peters across from Jalen Ramsey, but I think it works well for the Rams here. I mean, obviously, you want a good cornerback. That help. I mean, obviously helps you shut down the passing game, and the opposing wide receivers have actually somewhat been running rampant on the Rams of late. And I'm trying to look it up here. Yeah, the Rams rank 4th over the last 3 games in terms of fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. Chris Godwin went for 172 and 2 touchdowns. Mike Evans went for 89 and a touchdown. Last week, DK Metcalf week 5, DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett and David Moore all scored touchdowns. I mean, last week, notwithstanding, because they did play the San Francisco 49ers, and the San Francisco 49ers are running the ball at the most in the league right now. But
it's a great effect.
Yeah, and so it's interesting to me that they did trade Peters and then traded for Jalen Ramsey. I guess I don't really know how to react to that. I think it's a good addition, but it's like maybe not a slight, it's an upgrade at the position, but you are losing Aqib Talib. And it really would have made more sense to keep Peters and trade for Jalen Ramsey, going for it this year. And, well, I guess maybe not next year because Peters is done after this year.
I do understand that, and I feel like, I mean, kind of on the outside, you would definitely say that. And to be fair, Marcus Peters has had a career resurgence of sorts so far this year. That said, his burn rate of 2.4% this year, which is the percentage of targets allowed in which the defensive backs assigned receiver gain more than 5 yards of downfield separation, was number 53 in the NFL. Do you want to guess what Jalen Ramsey's burn rate was? Of course, he missed some games, but just, take a gander.
Top 10.
It was 0. It was 0. He's number 1 in the NFL. There's a chasm between these two players is what I'm trying to say. So yes, while I do understand that on the other side, I mean, it never is a bad thing in the modern NFL to have as good of a secondary as possible. This is a huge upgrade for this Rams team. I think in the same manner as it's a huge upgrade for this Rams team, it's also a huge upgrade for this Baltimore Ravens team, getting Marcus Peters on that team to round out the other side of Marlon Humphrey. So this is kind of an altering, a landscape altering move for me. I really do think that both of these teams were already halfway decent. We're already going to find themselves in the playoffs. I do think that we're going to see even more of that so far this year. A lot of people have a lot to say about the Rams offensive line and what Jared Goff can be. And I think there's question marks there, but I mean, if you're going to go for it, I feel like you have to go for it now because the team is relatively young, which kind of leads me into my next point. The Rams have a window. It's defined now. They've defined it themselves because they've sold all of their first-round picks for the next few years. The Rams kind of have to win now because things are starting to go downhill and things are going to start to become a lot more difficult to put together in the coming seasons. Next year, the Rams actually have only the 26th most cap space in the NFL. So I guess they're ranked number 26 in terms of total cap space next season. And eventually cuts are going to have to be made. I don't think that Higbee is going to be part of this team for much longer. I don't think that Gerald Everett is going to be a piece that the Rams can afford to keep. Of those three wide receivers, both Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp's deals are going to have to be addressed in the next couple of years. And I mean, even though for me it looks like Brandon Cooks will probably be the most expendable receiver, at least from a talent perspective, at least what we've seen this year, I don't know if they're going to be able to keep this group together. I mentioned Cooper Kupp being the one that I think is most likely to kind of keep his deal there because he's still on his rookie contract. And this next deal, I mean, even if it is on the higher end of paying receivers, I think they can keep that under cap. I don't think they'll be able to keep Robert Woods' extension under cap. Robert Woods is going to be paid something like $9 million next year, and it's just going to kind of go up from there. If you give me a second to look at it now, I can actually tell you what his whole contract is and when he'll be a free agent. But this is going to be a situation where Robert Woods, I think, is going to be the odd man out in Los Angeles. And if that's the case, is Robert Woods still the same player on a new team?
It's a valid question. I think that McVay has built a system that has allowed Woods to excel in that kind of possession X-type role. Cooks being that flanker Y-type role, and then Kupp being perfect for that slot receiver, that big slot. Robert Woods is extremely talented, and I think he will find a place where he will be successful, a la Tyrell Williams right now. But will he be nearly as successful as he was, like, let's say, last season? That's hard to say. I think he will have a few great or good years and will be fantasy viable, like top 24 years, but fighting for wide receiver one, I don't know if I can see it away from Los Angeles.
Going back to this, 5 years, $34 million was the contract that Robert Woods signed fresh off the Bills to join the Rams. He's now in the third year of that contract. The contract extends for 2 more years, and he's a free agent in the 2022 season when he's 30 years old. This season, he has a cap hit of $8.1 million, which is actually only about $1 million over what his cap hit was in 2017. So it's not something unheard of for Robert Woods. Next year, that jumps to $9.177 million against just a $4.355 million dead cap hit. So essentially what that means is that the Rams can save $5 million next year by moving away from Robert Woods, but that's not necessarily the year that I think that he is going to be gone. I think it's the following year in 2021, and of course, a lot can change between now and then. But in 2021, his cap hit of $9 million versus his dead cap of just $1 million is kind of hard to swallow, considering that you're going to have to be re-signing Jalen Ramsey around that time after he plays this year and on his 5th-year extension for next year. So this is a situation where I really do think that, I mean, I don't know what you do with Woods in this scenario. I think you have to keep him for the year, but I think this offseason is kind of a prime sell time for Robert Woods. Would you agree with that, or would you kind of just write it out at this point?
Yeah, I probably agree with that. His relative value right now is probably a little bit low just because of the Rams' offensive woes. But yeah, I mean, if he is actually, it's tough to say now that I think about it, because you and I were excited about Tyrell Williams this offseason, hoping that he would go to some place like the Colts. Went to the Raiders. We weren't as excited until he became the wide receiver one for the Raiders. So I think that's another situation we're dealing with where we know Robert Woods can be a wide receiver one wherever he plays. It's just whether he actually gets that chance or not, whether he's able to sign with a team that allows that to happen or not. So yes, if you want to stay safe. No, if you want to take a chance and see if that value spikes if he becomes a wide receiver one somewhere else.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think a lot of team construction will go into making that decision for you. But we have to move on to another pretty exciting team, the Green Bay Packers, not necessarily led, or at least not kind of completely and wholly led to the finish line by Aaron Rodgers. Rather, a lot more has to do with that scheme, and a lot more is being done with the running backs in this offense. But my question is this: if Jamal Williams is the mermaid, is Aaron Jones Ursula? Have we been rooting for the villain the whole time? What's happening with this Green Bay backfield? What should we expect from both Jamal Williams and Aaron Jones moving forward?
Well, I mean, this team is far different from what it was last year. I believe they were, and I'm looking this up, they were first in the league in terms of pass-to-run ratio last season. And that is according to Sharp Football Stats. This season, they are middle of the road. They're throwing the ball about 60% of the time, running it 40% of the time. Last year they threw the ball 68% of the time, obviously. I said threw it 68% of the time, ran it 32% of the time. So I think we are seeing a 60-40 split here. I mean, the snaps are relatively even between the two. I believe it was 51% to 49%. But Aaron Jones gets more touches overall. And I think that's closer to 60-40. So I think Matt LaFleur is kind of already shown what he wants to do. He wants to use both running backs, and that it caps the ceiling of Aaron Jones, but Aaron Jones is just far more efficient as a player. He's more explosive. He's faster. So I think both are fantasy viable, but obviously I think this just says more about, okay, Aaron Jones maybe not have the value we thought he would, because he's not going to have that bell cow role.
So let's talk about that for a little bit. In terms of value, what is an Aaron Jones worth, knowing or understanding that he is not going to be a complete bell cow in that backfield? Though I think one thing that people do need to understand about this situation is just what you pointed out, Stompy, that this team as a whole is just utilizing these running backs at a rate that we haven't seen from the Green Bay Packers for a long time. So even though one guy's not necessarily getting the whole pie, that doesn't mean that there isn't value there, just because of the sheer amount of volume that the running backs as a whole are getting from Matt LaFleur on this team, as Devontae Adams kind of gets his way back to the field, and as Aaron Rodgers, like I said, isn't the main focal point of that team's offense.
I mean, we have to think of it in terms of next year's class, I suppose, or any subsequent class. Most of the guys coming out next year as running backs will have legitimate shots at being bell cows. They are that good. I mean, we have DeAndre Swift, Jonathan Taylor, Benjamin, Cam Akers is starting to look fantastic. Travis Etienne. And I think I would put Aaron Jones in that group currently, because we know that he's going to be productive. He's going to be a productive running back, and we can't tell that, or say that those guys coming out will be the same as Aaron Jones. So I would say he's at least worth a 2021st. I would probably say like something like a 2021st and a second right now, because he has been good this season. I guess I don't really know how else to put it. I mean, he's been very productive, regardless of sharing time in that backfield. He is the RB4 right now in terms of points per game. Now, that 42-point game definitely helped that average, but at the same time, there was
can't just not count things.
Yeah, there's a 4-game stretch there where 21, 14, 12, 42. So I would say he's probably a top 18 running back right now, probably a top 12 running back in terms of an asset because of his age. So I would say he's at least worth a first and a second right now.
So just to kind of reiterate the difference in efficiency between the two of these guys, Aaron Jones has a success rate over average behind that top-level Green Bay run-blocking offensive line of about 7.5%, 7.5% over the average NFL running back, whereas Jamal Williams' success rate over average is under the average at negative 5.3%. That's the disparity between these two packs that we're talking about here. I really do think that is just a situation of making sure that Aaron Jones is available at the end of the season this year for the first time in his career, rather than, we really need to use both of these guys because both of these guys provide that same sort of element to our offense. That's not the case. Now, our last point before we get off this subject, Aaron Jones did fumble in the last game, and it seemed like after that fumble and the drop wide open touchdown, which just got me in the heart because I own him in a few places here, he was kind of the second fiddle. He turned into Jamal Williams for the day, and Jamal Williams actually got the majority of the touches in that contest. Do we think that maybe there's a situation where the coaches don't trust Jones in the same way that fantasy players do? Or do we think that this is just kind of a hot hand scenario and anything can happen in any given week?
I think it's a hot hand scenario. They can't. I mean, they can't sit Aaron Jones. They've seen what Aaron Jones is, what he can be, and it seemed like a couple mental lapses got him put on the bench. Now he played like the next series, not the next series, but the
he
series
got the next
after.
touch. He got the next touch. But
so it's just one of those things where it's like, but we say this, and then we can go back to Mike McCarthy and be like, he's very obviously the most talented running back, but that doesn't mean he's going to get playing time. I do think he will garner, like, I still think it's going to be like 60-40 in terms of touches. They're going to be saying the same amount of playing time just in terms of snaps. But yeah, I mean, his ceiling is it's capped if Jamal Murray is on the field.
Yeah, I think I have to agree with you there. Aaron Jones is still the guy to own. Don't fret. Don't worry, Aaron Jones owners. Don't do what we just talked about with Stephon Diggs and let that recency bias force you into making bad decisions. Aaron Jones is still a top-level asset, and he should be treated as such. But I think Jamal Williams has a little bit more value than we originally thought at the beginning of the season, just based on what we've seen from the usage so far and the intent by that team to keep Aaron Jones fresh enough to, again, be available at the end of the season. Let's move on. 59.9% completion percentage, negative 6.2 completion percentage over expected, a 7.2 ADOT, just about a yard more than Derek Carr's 5.9 this year, 582 yards after catch to just 1125 air yards, 7 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, a 10% quarterback hit rate so far this season. Good night, sweet prince.
Louder for the people in the back. Louder for the people in the back. I want you. I think the people who thought Mariota was good, a la John Hogue, J. Mike Check, Dynasty Outhouse, I don't know who the hell else. I want you to rewind this to when Aton started saying numbers, and then you tell me that he's a good quarterback.
Not only is he not a good quarterback, he was the worst quarterback that he's been in 5 iterations of his career in 5 seasons. Marcus Mariota took a seat down for Ryan Tannehill. Is this a situation where we're going to see a flip-flop back and forth with these two guys? Is this a situation where Ryan Tannehill is the starter for the remainder of the season? Is this a situation where Marcus Mariota comes back like Alex Smith in a couple of years and is a valued starter somewhere else? Do we think that there's anything salvageable here, or is this kind of the end of an era?
I don't know. He definitely has not shown improvement in 4 years, 5 years. Is this year 5?
Year 5.
I could definitely see him getting another shot. There are definitely teams that, let's just say, somehow the Bengals.
I would take him at the Broncos. I would definitely take Marcus Mariota.
You know, Joe Flacco's not that bad, but there are teams that will give him a look in terms of starting quarterback. I mean, the Bengals right now, dependent on what their draft situation is. Who else is there?
We got the Bengals. We got the Dolphins. They don't know what they're doing with quarterback. We probably should have talked about that. I guess we will in just a few minutes here. Who else is there that needs a quarterback? I mean, I would say the 49ers, but that would just piss off 49er fans, even though I had a message for some of them posted on Twitter the other day. Jimmy Garoppolo is still not a good quarterback. I'm just going to say
never has been.
While we're here, he's never been a good quarterback. He's on a good team. But that's besides the point.
Point being that I think if he had a better defense, so let's just say you put him on the 2015 Broncos, I still think they win a Super Bowl. That's how good that defense was. He doesn't turn the ball over. He's just not going to win you games. Like, that dude is the epitome of a game manager. So, yeah, I think he'll still get a shot somewhere, but I don't know how much you actually expect from him, because I know through the first 2 seasons, people were expecting a lot from Marcus Mariota. But now after these 3 seasons, you're kind of shrugging your shoulders and saying, maybe this dude, I mean, he might be Alex Smith, but even Alex Smith in his years with the Chiefs, like, he had the one fantastic season. Other than that, it's just more game manager than anything. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's a very apt comparison as Alex Smith.
5 money throws, number 18 overall in the NFL. Those money throws are defined as a pass requiring exceptional skill or athleticism, as well as throws executed in clutch critical moments on playerprofiler.com. to 8 interceptable passes, number 13th in the NFL. So, yes, he wasn't picked off much. He didn't turn the ball over all that much, but that doesn't mean that he didn't luck out a lot of those situations. This was just a bad scene. If you're not able to succeed, and I make fun of Corey Davis, but it's not Corey Davis's fault. It's Marcus Mariota's fault. But if you're not able to succeed with Davis and with A.J. Brown and with Delaney Walker and with a strong run game with Derrick Henry, I mean, I don't know what offense you're transplanted into that you are immediately successful again without that incredible defense that Sam, you just mentioned. So I don't know if this is curtains for Marcus Mariota, but it's certainly not a good look. I really don't think there's much relevance to be gained in the next couple of seasons, at the very least, from anybody that's still holding on to Marcus Mariota out there. But if we're going to talk about Marcus Mariota, then just by association, we have to talk about his draft classmate, Jameis Winston. 400 yards thrown, but 6 total turnovers. Bruce Arians seems to be getting a little bit frustrated. I don't know if this is a situation where he gets benched, because I don't know if Ryan Griffin, who I think is the backup in Tampa Bay, I'm not even sure, is
Blaine Gabbert.
There we go. Is anywhere near as good as Ryan Tannehill, but I mean, is this a situation to monitor as well? Like, I felt that Jameis Winston was going to be in a strong place to get a contract extension at the end of the season. I don't know if I still feel like that, but do we think that he's going to be benched anytime soon, or is this kind of just the roller coaster you have to expect from Jameis. You take the good and you take the bad, and the good is certainly there, but there's plenty of bad as well.
You never know. I mean, Arians has coached Blaine Gabbert before. I don't think he's going to get benched. I think the situation that you need to monitor is what happens this offseason with quarterback situation. Because, and I mean, is this not the epitome of Jameis Winston at this point? The dude will throw for 400 yards, but he will throw for, 5 interceptions is a little extreme, but he'll throw for 2 or 3 interceptions because he just makes stupid decisions. They cannot win with Jameis Winston because you can't trust him with the game on the line. But this is fantasy football, and in fantasy football, Jameis Winston, I believe, is like the QB7.
QB 12, like I think, was the last time I checked.
He's a QB9. Well, hold on.
There we go.
QB9 in points per game right now. And that's fantasy football. You can trust him week in and week out just in terms of fantasy, but is he going to have a job next season? I don't know.
Yeah, this is going to be an interesting situation to monitor. I think his performance obviously his performance has a lot to do with whether or not he has a job next season, but in ways other than at least the ones that you would think of immediately, if the Buccaneers don't have a draft pick that's going to allow them to replace Jameis Winston, then I think Jameis Winston might find himself on that team all over again. Maybe, if not with a long-term contract, with a franchise tag. But if the Bucs kind of sputter out into mediocrity and become one of those teams that is going to have one of those top 10 draft picks, then this is certainly a situation where he can be replaced. So that's a situation to monitor. I don't see it going the same way as Marcus Mariota, but you have to. You cannot, in good faith, just completely disregard all the red flags at this point. While we're talking about that, should we talk about O.J. Howard? Should we talk about Cameron Brate? Should we talk about what's going on between Mike Evans and Chris Godwin on that team? Like, what or who is the value here? What is the value here? And, are people kind of going crazy with their, I guess, dismissal of Mike Evans because of the Chris Godwin breakout?
You can't dismiss a guy who has 5 straight seasons of 15 or over 1,000 yards?
1,000 yards.
Coming off of a 1,500 yard season.
On pace for 1,200 yards right now.
Yeah. So that I have something to say about this because I've seen people saying stuff about like guys like Juju, Mike Evans, and they see like a couple bad games and they freak out. But then you have to look at his total stats. Like Juju, and it might be a little bit different now, but Juju, despite not scoring those first 3 weeks, was on pace for something like 1,300 yards and 6 touchdowns, which would have been a wide receiver 1 at the end of the season. Like, you need to stop reacting in fantasy football. Just bad games happen. Not everybody's going to put up 100% awesome games. And that's true for Mike Evans. That's true for Juju Smith-Schuster. That's true for, Joe Mixon might be a little bit of a difference or a different person, but it's just look at the whole. Juju is still only 23 years old. Do not sell Juju. I understand he had a bad game last week because of Devlin Hodges. Guess what he had the week before? He had 7 catches for 75 yards and a touchdown with Mason Rudolph.
Who
you freaking out if that's Big Ben right there? Absolutely not. So it's one of those things where it's like, okay, he's had 4 good games and 2 bad games. Guess what? I'm taking that every day of the week because ultimately that leads to 10 good games, 6 bad games, something like that. And guess what? That's going to happen in fantasy football. That happens for everybody in fantasy football.
Consistency is a myth.
It is. And so stop reacting, stop devaluing players, especially in Dynasty. And the reason I'm going off on this tangent is because I saw a Twitter poll today, Juju or a 2021.01. And that's Juju 100% to me. Like, that's not even close. Juju is worth at least 2 first-round picks right now. He's probably worth let's just say a second or third tier wide receiver and a first-round pick. Let's say he's probably worth Kenny Golladay in a first right now. That's how good Juju is, that how young Juju is. Stop reacting because of 1 or 2 games. A la Stephon Diggs. Quit it.
That's how people lose draft equity, lose any type of equity in their teams over time, and stay in a constant position of rebuilding and having to do it over and over and over and over again, and never actually competing for titles. So that is going to be the end of this little startup portion for us. We're going to get over into the next section of our podcast. But before we do that, I want to go ahead and shout out our awesome sponsors, Fantasy Data. We are sponsored by one of the industry's leading NFL and fantasy research sites in Fantasy Data. Whether you want to consistently hear from some of the community's most trusted voices, check out their advanced efficiency and player performance metrics, or populate your own personal projection models, they've definitely got something for you. The Dynasty Trade Calculator Network has got you covered with our exclusive code. It is Dynasty20. All you have to do is go over to the site. That'll save you 20% on all of their subscription services. Again, that's Dynasty20. See you at Fantasy Data. All right, guys, let's jump into our 5-point inspection. A lot longer than 5 points today. We're going to start kind of where we ended just a couple of minutes ago. We're not going to talk about Jameis Winston because we've already done that, but we have to talk about Jared Goff and Sam Darnold. I mean, Jared Goff threw for 78 yards in an NFL football game this past week. And Sam Darnold came back, and it looked like the Jets were completely dead, but Robbie Anderson, everything that you wanted from him, you got in a long 92-yard bomb from Sam Darnold. And they were able to actually win the game in his first game off of mono. What does this mean for the shifting sands of both of these teams? Do we think this is a situation where the Rams start to lose a few more in a row here, and the Jets start to go the other way given their schedule, at least I think after this next game? Or is this a situation where, I mean, shit happens in the league, and you kind of just have to roll with the punches, and we haven't learned too much from both of these guys quite yet?
Yeah, on Goff, I think take that game with a grain of salt. I mean, he's definitely not been nearly as good this season, but he had 4 straight games of basically 23 points or more. San Francisco's a legit defense. We'll talk about DVOAs here in a second, but they are first overall against the pass. And the previous week, they held Baker Mayfield to 100 yards. So it's not like this is just some anomaly from San Francisco. They have been doing this all season. Like I said, take that with a grain of salt. That entire game was anomalous on the offensive side of the ball for the Rams. But there should be some concern about this offense because it seems like not only does Goff have the yips, but it seems like Sean McVay has the yips. And I don't know if that stems from Bill Belichick being able to expose McVay last season or in the Super Bowl because they ran basically 11 personnel, 97% of the time, and they didn't really do anything different. And now McVay is trying to change up his tendencies and not show his full hand. They're on a 3-game slide. I mean, they do play Atlanta this week. I think the offense gets back on track this week. But yeah, I mean, there's got to be some concern. Goff is throwing for a lot of yards, but he's only got a 1-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio, only has 7 touchdowns through the first 6 weeks. So this Rams offense is definitely not what we thought it was going to be coming into the season.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know if a lot of it has to do with Gurley. I don't know if I'm going to give a running back all that credit in that game, but it's a different team this year. It's a different belief that you have in the Rams, and you really only think that you're going to get 1 or 2 performers worth rostering on any given week. Whereas in years past, I mean, if a person was suiting up for the Los Angeles Rams, you wanted to play them that particular week. But yeah.
By the way, San Francisco has held 4 of 5 quarterbacks under 200 yards passing.
Great defense
on the season.
Great defense so far, and we'll get into that, like Sam said, in just a moment here. But yeah, I do think this is a situation where the Rams are still a very, very valued team. If you roster Cooper Kupp, if you roster Brandon Cooks, if you roster Robert Woods, stay the course. Stay the course. Just relax. Understand that these guys are going to have good games and bad games. I think Cooks of the three is probably going to be the most frustrating one because you don't know when he's going to have his blow-up games. But I still think that they'll be there, and I still think that Sean McVay will get this turned around eventually. But yeah, like you mentioned before, they were running 11 personnel at a crazy clip last year. I just haven't seen the same usage of that so far this year because defenses are forcing them out of it, and they're forcing them to run from formations that they're not as familiar with. So this is going to be a trying season for the Los Angeles Rams, and I just hope they don't end up being a losing team now, kind of laden with all the cap that they're going to have to deal with in the next couple of years, with them being so lowly ranked in terms of overall cap in 2020 and years beyond, with this new trade for Jalen Ramsey and not having the ability to go out and use first-round picks to acquire cheap talent anytime soon. That said, because they went ahead and they continue to trade top-end draft picks, I do think that this Rams team is relatively stable outside of the one wide receiver on that team, I think, no longer being there. Because they have to be. The guys that they have in the building right now are the guys that they're going to have to roll with. So in Dynasty, where, at least for me, stability is a big factor in terms of where I value players, I think you still have to put a point on the side of the Rams players in most cases, just because they don't have the ability to be as flexible as most teams are going to be with all of those draft picks to kind of mix and match in the future. All right, so now let's talk about the Cleveland Browns. You mentioned that Baker Mayfield was held to just 100 yards by the San Francisco defense, but that kind of has been the norm more than the exception so far this season. Maybe not to the extreme of 100 yards, but Baker Mayfield has not been the prince that's promised, and this Browns team is kind of in a free fall, so to speak. I mean, is this a team that we should really be staying away from outside of Nick Chubb? And it kind of is mind-boggling to me to even consider putting OBJ into that. But, I mean, other than name right now, is OBJ worth multiple first-round picks? Is anybody on that team with a first-round pick outside of Nick Chubb and OBJ? I don't know if that's the case. What's your stance on this?
I mean, we can't ignore what OBJ did for his first 4 seasons in the league. He set records. He is one of the best wide receivers in the game. This was something I warned about. Sorry, I warned about. You were on Baker before the season started. This was I think Baker has a bright future. I do. I think he's a good quarterback. But when you have things working against you, like your offensive line, which is ranked 26th in adjusted sack percentage on the season. Sorry, 24th in adjusted sack percentage on the season. When you have a head coach who refuses to give up play calling, even though it's been really ineffective. When you have a brand new wide receiver with a young quarterback, there are bound to be some hiccups. And Baker he has those two things working against him, but he's also not been reading the field well. He's not been making good decisions. And sophomore slumps are a thing. And I don't know why we just ignore these things sometimes. But OBJ is definitely worth multiple firsts. It's just one of those things where it's like, it may not be this year. This just might be a down season for the Browns. But give them an entire offseason to work together. And I think they will be better next season. It's just Baker's young. He's making some silly mistakes right now, but he will get better.
If you buy OBJ right now in season, yes, I think you have to pay more than one first because he's Odell Beckham Jr. No other information than that. But veterans tend to be devalued in the offseason in dynasty leagues as people look to the new and look to the shiny. In the offseason, especially with this 2020 class, maybe even on draft day, if you go to a frustrated OBJ owner and offer him a first round pick, maybe a second on top of that, I think you might be able to snag OBJ for a lot less than he's worth and be able to reap the rewards next season, as Sam was saying. I think it's going to take some time for this team to gel. I think Jarvis Landry is going to be off the team next year. I think that's going to free up a lot of targets. Trent Williams is a guy that is apparently on the trade radar of the Cleveland Browns. I think that would help them tremendously when it comes to the offensive line. I do think that there are brighter days ahead for Cleveland. There are brighter days ahead for OBJ. Timing is everything when it comes to making deals in fantasy football. And I think this is one of those situations where you let the guy that has him take the bad season and have to make a decision next season with all the hype surrounding this 2020 class. Is that a strategy that you think would pay off in this respect? Or do you think that, with Odell Beckham Jr., this is just a guy with so much star power that that's not really going to fly regardless?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to fly regardless. I think people who own OBJ are not going to be selling that low on him. Same with like DeAndre Hopkins. I just, you're not going to get these guys who have dominated this league for years, are still relatively young, for very much cheaper. I mean, I think cheaper is like, okay, you have to give up 2 firsts worth of value to get these guys. And that is quote unquote buying low. So yeah, I don't know about buying low on any superstar laden talent.
Well, here's a guy that some people are buying low on right now that I'm not sure if that's even justified at this point because of what's happened so far this season. Guy I'm talking about so far is Melvin Gordon. And Melvin Gordon has only averaged 3.2 yards per touch, 2.5 true yards per carry, number 55 in the entire league. He's only created 2.5 yards created per game and 0.19 yards created per carry, number 88 so far in the National Football League. Austin Eckler was balling earlier, but it seems like the touch split between Melvin Gordon and Austin Eckler right now is kind of sinking both boats here. Melvin Gordon's not going to be on this team next year. He's so far been one of the least efficient backs in the NFL when it comes to success rate, when it comes to net expected points. Is Melvin Gordon a guy that you'd be targeting next year? And do we think that this might be a situation where if you have Melvin Gordon, he needs to be off your team as soon as possible because the situation next year can get a lot worse before it gets better for him?
That's hard to say. So I think I was off of Melvin Gordon at the beginning of the season because I thought his value was going to take a dip when he leaves LA. And I think it really depends on where he goes, but now I think his value is relatively low to the point where I would be buying. If you can get Melvin Gordon for a first right now, I would be doing that in a heartbeat. And in terms of this season, I don't know what anybody else expected. The dude isn't in football shape. It was going to take him a couple weeks to get into football shape. So be patient if you did buy him. He has not looked good in his first 2 games, but he's also faced at least one good defense. I don't know who else he faced. Who did he face before or after the Broncos last week? Hold on, I can't hear you.
Sorry, I said keep talking. I'll pull it up.
I say you need to be patient here, but I think it's a buy time because if he ends up in a situation where he is a bell cow and you can buy him for a first, that was more than worth that first round pick in my mind.
Yeah, the last couple of games for the Chargers have been against the Steelers, the Broncos, and then right before that, the Dolphins and the Texans.
Okay, so the Steelers are better against the run than they have been against the pass. The Broncos have just stepped up. Besides the one game with Leonard Fournette, they have been a very good defense this season. So, I mean, take that into account here too. He's not in football shape. I would expect him to have a better go of things in these coming weeks. So don't sell too low. Be patient if you did buy him. But if you want to sell low, I think now is the time. Or sorry, did I say sell low? I meant buy low.
Yeah, we're gonna be on opposite sides of this one. I have little faith in Melvin Gordon moving forward. He's a guy that, I mean, yards per carry is what it is, but he's only averaged 4 yards per carry, only one of his 5 seasons so far in the NFL. That was an ideal situation behind the best offensive line that the Chargers have had in recent memory, and one of the best offenses that the Chargers have had in recent memory. Going into next season, you just mentioned the bevy of backs that are going to be out there available for a lot cheaper than Melvin Gordon next year. I assume he's going to go somewhere. I don't necessarily know if he's going to get the contract he wants. And even if he goes somewhere, I don't know if that's going to be completely a bell cow type scenario for him. For me, a guy that's 26 and a half years old, going to be 27 at the end of this year, going to be 28 going into next year. That's already on the back end of a running back's kind of period of usefulness until they're about 29 years old, unless you're Frank Gore and, you know, you have the Infinity Stones and you can do this forever. This is kind of a situation to avoid for me anyway. This is a lot like Le'Veon Bell last season, except for the fact that Le'Veon Bell had a whole year of rest and came back a year younger than Melvin Gordon will be next year. So for me, I just don't see the efficiency to justify wanting to really put too much stock, too much value into Melvin Gordon right now. That said, like you were saying, Sam, if you can buy for a first, I mean, if you are, I don't know, 4-2, looking pretty good this season, probably at least going to make it in the playoffs, trying to kind of solidify that push. Going to have a lower first round pick anyway, then yeah, that's maybe something I would consider. But if you have a mid to early first, anything kind of 106 and kind of beyond, I don't necessarily know if I'm going to be spending that on Melvin Gordon right now. All right, so now let's go into a conversation that both Sam and I have had in the One Trade Addicts League that we share, Trade Addicts 6. Shout out to Dynasty Outhouse, creator of the Trade Addicts. Shout out to Trade Addicts Pod with both him and Brian Harr. Please make sure to listen to that show as well. Bill Latin in that trade room. We had a conversation this offseason about Austin Hooper. I thought Austin Hooper was tight end 8 thereabouts, something like that. A solid tight end, but nothing spectacular. I've been proven wrong this year. I think Austin Hooper is tight end 4 at this point, and I really do think that 4 through 6 are kind of interchangeable. But I think him and Ertz at that 4th spot for me, or at that 3rd or 4th spot for me, is a conversation that needs to be had at this point. Are we seeing kind of the apex of what Austin Hooper can be? Are we seeing a result of Atlanta being behind in every game and just having to throw like crazy? Or is this a real life true thing that's happening right now? And is Austin Hooper definitively in that elite class of tight ends? I think that extends all the way to Hunter Henry at about tight end 6.
By the way, not counting Hunter Henry's one game, Austin Hooper is the tight end 1. I mean, it's been coming he's gotten better literally every season of his career. And now he had his quote unquote breakout last season. Now we're in his 4th season where he's becoming a superstar at the position. I mean, it probably has a little bit to do with them having to throw. But I mean, the guy has 6 or more targets in every game. So I don't know. I don't know what else to say there. I mean, he is one of Matt Ryan's go-to targets right now. He is the second best pass catcher on the Atlanta Falcons right now. That's despite Calvin Ridley. That's despite Mohamed Sanu. The guy is just garnering targets and he's producing. And as he produces, Matt Ryan is going to keep going to him. So yeah, I think it has a lot to do with them playing from behind and having to throw a lot. But I think Austin Hooper is the real deal, man.
Austin Hooper has the 8th ranked weighted opportunity ratio amongst all tight ends in the league, which is one of Josh Hermsmeyer's most eye-opening statistics when it comes to receivers, any type of receivers, tight ends included. You just mentioned targets. Austin Hooper has 50 targets. Yeah, I mean, another tight end that has 50 targets? I think there's might be one of them. I think that is Zach Ertz. I think other than that, he has the most targets to the tight end position in the league so far this season. Even Travis Kelce has not crested 50 targets quite yet. He's at 49. Evan Ingram finds himself at 48. But on these targets, I think what's even more surprising is he is doing a lot with them himself. He has 192 yards after catch, which I guess is third overall in terms of all the tight ends in the NFL, just behind Evan Ingram, just behind Darren Waller. He has 3 TDs to his name. His ADOT is 7.3, which is healthy for a tight end. His racer is 1.32, tied with Evan Ingram for the best racer in the entire National Football League when it comes to the tight end position. And he's only doing this on a 19% target share in Atlanta. That said, I think the important point is I believe he's only been targeted 3 fewer times than Julio Jones so far this year. He's the clear number 2 target out in Atlanta over Calvin Ridley, over Mohamed Sanu. So as long as this team is going to be behind in games and is going to be passing to catch up, I really do think that Austin Hooper can keep the streak going. And even in a scenario where that's not the case, I mean, athletically, he's very, very similar to a guy we love in Hunter Henry. So I really do think that all of it is there for Austin Hooper to be a force going forward. Sam and I have talked ad hominem about the number of years that it takes tight ends to break out in this league. It's around year 4 to 5 where we start to see most of these tight ends really come into their own, and we're seeing that with Austin Hooper. I think he needs to be valued as such, and I don't think he's a throw-in. I don't think he's a guy that you should be getting for any less than about a first-round pick at this point.
No, I completely agree. I mean, like you said, you're talking top 4, probably top 5 tight end right now, and he's still young for the tight end position. And I mean, maybe you put Hunter Henry in there. Other than that, I mean, OJ Howard, I think, has dropped out of that top 6 for most people because he just isn't being used. Who else do you have in there?
Yeah, it'd be tough. I mean, Will Dissly would find himself in there as well, but he's hurt. Darren Waller, possibly, but I don't necessarily know if I'm going to put him above Hooper or Henry or those guys. So for me, the tight ends, it's pretty simple. For me, it goes George Kittle, I think, is the number 1 tight end in the National Football League and Dynasty leagues right now. I think right after him, for me, it would be Evan Ingram, but I can see a lot of people putting Kelce right there. If you're going to put Kelce at 2, I would put Ingram at 3. And then it's really close at 4 between Austin Hooper and Zach Ertz for me. Outside of that, whoever's not 4 is 5, and I think Hunter Henry is tight end 6, and I think he can move up with some elongated health and some positive performances. But that's the tight end landscape for me. If you're going to be in that group, I really do think that that is a distinct advantage over your league week in, week out. All right, so Austin Hooper, tight end 4, Patrick Mahomes, ankle injury. This is a thing that's getting re-aggravated every single week, and it's night and day. Patrick Mahomes before he re-aggravates his ankle injury, and Patrick Mahomes after he aggravates his ankle injury in these games. I think this is the second game in a row that the Kansas City Chiefs have dropped, and it's just because their offense is not doing as well in these second halves that they used to dominate, because Patrick Mahomes is less mobile than he's been able to be in the last couple of seasons. We already know that Kansas City doesn't have the best offensive line out there in terms of the Football Outsiders information. I can look that up, or Sam, if you want to look that up for me. I know that the Kansas City Chiefs aren't one of the greatest teams when it comes to either adjusted sack rate or any of their run blocking offensive line metrics.
They're actually 5th.
They're fifth in what? Adjusted sack rate?
Yep.
Oh, well, I guess I'm wrong with that one. But I mean, for me, it seems like this Chiefs offensive line, at least maybe with that metric, would probably be helped by Patrick Mahomes getting the ball out of his hands really, really quickly. But in terms of actual talent, I don't think that offensive line is one of the best out there. In terms of run blocking, I know that they're not that high. So you can go ahead and look that up, and maybe that'll give some credence to what I'm saying here. But I think he covered up a lot of the cracks up front on that Kansas City Chiefs team because of his ability to keep those plays going. But if he's going to be less mobile than he's been in the past, I mean, is Patrick Mahomes human at this point? Is Patrick Mahomes finished QB1 at this point with this injury that seems to be lingering for most of the year? Their bye week isn't until late in the season. So is this a situation where he could survive until then? And if he's only surviving until then, are the Kansas City Chiefs as good of a team as we thought they were?
I mean, he did have 273 yards and 3 touchdowns last week. So it's not his last 3 games have not been fantastic. He's finished below 60% completion percentage. He only has 4 touchdowns, 1 interception in those 3 games. So it's a valid concern, but the dude keeps throwing for 300 plus goddamn yards a game. Like, I don't care if he's mobile or not. The guy is going to chuck the ball downfield, and he's going to be the best at it in the game. Now, in terms of being the top QB in the league, when you have Lamar Jackson being able to run for 100 yards and throw for 200 yards, that's going to make him the best fantasy QB in the league. Patrick Mahomes is still the best QB in the league. Also, the Chiefs rank 30th in adjusted line yards.
Yeah, in terms of the running back type stuff.
Yeah. So I'm not concerned about Patrick Mahomes. Yes, he's had a relative, and maybe that's the argument here is that Patrick Mahomes has been so good that even just like a great stretch of games is just like one of those, oh, well, something's wrong with Patrick Mahomes, despite him having thrown for 3 touchdowns in one game, thrown for over 300 yards in 2 of those games. So it's just, I'm fine. I don't think anybody should be panicking. He had a couple games like this last season. He might have a game like this against the Broncos tomorrow because Broncos defense has actually been fantastic this season. And Patrick Mahomes, we'll say struggled, and struggled is relative here, but struggled against the Broncos last season. So if somebody is going to panic, I would be buying all of the Patrick Mahomes I could.
Yeah, I mean, it would take a lot to panic sell Patrick Mahomes. I do think that, maybe that's his Achilles. Maybe his Achilles is his Achilles, and maybe that would at least make him not miles ahead the rest of the QBs in the National Football League so far this season. The only QB that's really kind of gained any ground on him in terms of the MVP conversation is Russell Wilson, even with his injury. So, yeah, let's not overstate it, but it is definitely something to monitor. Interesting proposition that I want to throw out at you. I want to get up the schedule here so I can give an accurate take when talking about this, but I know that Dak Prescott has a really good matchup this week against his opponent, whereas the Kansas City Chiefs have a tougher matchup. Now, say what you want to about the value of our understanding of defenses and what that means, but if somebody like Dak Prescott, who is in that second tier of quarterbacks, I believe, who has the potential to really jump into that top 5, top 3 conversation and kind of showed it so far, or at least at the beginning of the season before these last 3 games or so. If you have a guy with a superior matchup in that tier, are you starting him over Mahomes?
Depends on if Amari Cooper's back.
Well, Amari Cooper won't be, but let's assume that he was.
So if Amari Cooper was there, I wouldn't. First and foremost, if you have Dak and
Chiefs Broncos is the matchup this week, and then the Dallas matchup is Philadelphia.
like I said, I mean, if Cooper's there, yes, probably. Reading into the actual matchups, and somebody will come at me and say you can't sit your studs, and it's yada yada whatever. But you really have to look at the Broncos. You have to look at matchups there. I mean, the Broncos are third, I believe, in allowing fantasy points to QBs, the third fewest. The Eagles are, I believe, top 5 in allowing the most fantasy points to QBs. If fully healthy, I would probably actually lean Dak. If Amari Cooper was healthy, I would lean Dak there.
Yeah, that's an interesting scenario. Just kind of have to be mindful of all the moving parts. You mentioning Dak is kind of another thing to throw out here. When looking at matchups, it's not just looking at a player in a vacuum. You have to understand the circumstances that are actually around him that are going to affect his play so far this season. But let's now go to our next point. Marquise Brown, Terry McLaurin, both of these guys are absolutely tearing it up. Terry McLaurin more so than Marquise Brown lately. That's just because he is getting pay dirt twice, seemingly every game. Marquise Brown is one of the highest wide receiver shares of both air yards and targets in that Ravens offense in the NFL. Which one of these guys do you think is going to be the guy that you wish that you had come next season and into the future? I think both of these guys are probably within a shout of wide receiver 2s very, very soon and probably should be valued that way. But is one of these guys special? Is one of these guys going to be a top 12 wide receiver sooner than we think?
The QB situations are tough here. I would say I would trust Hollywood more with Lamar Jackson than I do with whatever Washington's going to be throwing out there on a week-to-week basis next year. Terry McLaurin's been fantastic with Case Keenum, but we saw Dwayne Haskins struggle severely against New York. Colt McCoy was not great last week against New England, but it's obviously New England. Though Terry McLaurin did have 51 yards, which is surprising. He had three receptions for 51 yards against New England. So I think Hollywood brings a Tyreek Hill type component. And if Lamar Jackson and Hollywood could even be let's just say 50% of what Patrick Mahomes and Tyreek Hill have been, I would love that. And we've seen them make some connections. He's definitely had some slumps here lately. I think I like Hollywood more because of the quarterback situation than I do McLaurin. But I think, like you said, both are top 24 wide receivers as soon as next season.
So this might just be me kind of talking for the sake of it, but kind of just follow me along this rabbit hole just for a little bit. So here's the difference I see between Terry McLaurin and Marquise Brown. Marquise Brown's situation is stable. He already has a good quarterback. That team already spent a lot of draft capital on wide receivers and on other targets around him. The tight ends are already kind of pretty solidified in the Baltimore Ravens camp. Whereas you look at the Washington Redskins, and while Terry McLaurin is producing at the level that he's producing in right now, I do think that you also have to understand that he is the only person in that offense outside of maybe Chris Thompson that is going to do anything for you. So while you take that performance, I think you also have to understand that you should be taking it with a grain of salt because there isn't much around them. This Washington team is going to have some of the highest picks in the NFL next season. They are going to add skill position talent to that team that might, I don't know if it will, but it might crowd some of Terry McLaurin's total volume in that offense, whereas Marquise Brown is in a situation where the wide receivers that he's competing with are already on the team. Miles Boykin is still on that team. Willie Snead, I believe, still has a year after this one to be on that team. Mark Andrews isn't going anywhere anytime soon. Nick Boyle is still there. They still have talent that's solidified. So between the two of these guys, I think, like Sam, I have to go with the one in the more stable situation. And for me, that would be Marquise Brown. And that's an example of just kind of looking at the whole situation when trying to evaluate these players for dynasty purposes, looking at a long-term type deal there. Is that kind of a line of thinking that you share, or do you think that is just superfluous?
No, I agree. I mean, I just the Ravens have already spent their draft capital on young wide receivers. I don't think they're going to go that direction. They need help on the defensive side of the ball, but you're absolutely right. I mean, you do have Calvin Harmon there in Washington, but they need more help on the offense. And if they add a tight end, if they add another wide receiver, I mean, I would have to look at what the target share is for McLaurin, but you have to think that target share drops a bit with more pass catchers and with a healthy Darius Geis. So yeah, I absolutely agree.
All right, so now we are going to go into one of these stats that you should definitely be looking at when trying to evaluate wide receivers in your fantasy football leagues, in your dynasty leagues. This is a stat that matters that I'm sure you've already heard about, but maybe you haven't actually had the breakdown on it. Air yards. So let's look at the wide receivers with the most air yards in the National Football League. At number 1, Mike Evans, 829 air yards. The next receiver is over 100 air yards behind Mike Evans. So for all the people, again, jumping off the Mike Evans bandwagon here, guys, the volume is there. The volume, the opportunity is there, and that's what you want. Number 2 in that list is Will Fuller, who effectively dropped 3 touchdowns last week. Julio Jones is number 3. Keenan Allen just after him. Some of the surprising guys that are near the top of this list are Curtis Samuel, DJ Chark, McLaurin himself, Mike Williams, as well as, let me see if I can find one more that you might not be expecting. Devontae Parker actually is, I believe, in the top 15 of air yards as well. So air yards are the total distance thrown to this receiver, whether that's completed or whether that ends up incomplete. It's the total distance thrown to the receiver. What this helps you identify is it helps you identify the receivers that are getting high value targets because they are further down the field. Mike Evans, Will Fuller, Julio Jones, Keenan Allen, Odell Beckham, Chris Godwin, Curtis Samuel, DJ Chark, Terry McLaurin, Hopkins, Williams, Galladay, Diggs, Parker, Ridley, and Brown. Just after them is Amari Cooper. These are the guys that are at the top of their position in terms of total air yards. So I think this necessitates a conversation about Curtis Samuel and about DJ Chark. I mean, how real are these guys? We talked about DJ Chark a little bit last week. He had a little bit of a down game last week against that Saints defense. Curtis Samuel's a guy that has not gotten much airtime so far this year, but has been quietly a very, very effective receiver. I think he's finished wide receiver 31 or better in 3 of the 6 games so far this season with the quarterback carousel that they've had go on in Carolina. Should we start to move these guys towards the top of our wide receiver boards here when it comes to looking at it from a dynasty perspective? Or is this kind of just a situation where these guys are put into a role, their role is to be the deep threat, and they're doing that?
I mean, Shark, yes. Samuel, iffy for me because of the presence of DJ Moore. With Shark, there's not really anybody else there. I mean, yes, there is Dede, but there's no pass catchers really for the Jaguars right now. And Shark has been getting tons and tons of targets. It's not like he's just a deep threat. He's getting red zone targets. He's getting monster amount of targets this season. He's had 4 more targets in every game. And he's had 8, 11, and 7 in each of the last 3. He's also had a 9 target game. So it's not, I don't think that's going to change. So yeah, I mean, I think we do need to move Shark up after this season because he keeps doing it. It's not like he's not doing it almost every game. Like I said, with Curtis Samuel, it's iffy. But Curtis Samuel has 4 more targets in every game. He's had 7, 7, 6, 6 the last 4. He had a 13 target game there. So I think the question is, who is going to be the QB in Carolina? And do you trust said QB?
Have we made any ground on the DJ Moore, Curtis Samuel, who's better discussion?
I don't think so, because neither has just like blown the other out of the water. I mean, DJ Moore's had right now. DJ Moore has 425 yards. Curtis Samuel has 297. He has 2 touchdowns to Moore's 1. Yards per receptions even. So Moore, it seems, is getting more targets. And well, maybe not. So no, I mean, it's 49-43. Like, both are performing well. I don't know who you prefer there. I mean, we know Curtis Samuel's a great runner. DJ Moore is better after the catch. I think both bring different skills to their game, and they're both very valuable. So no, I don't think there has been a separation between the two.
Most targeted wide receivers in the league, aside from air yards, is probably the second thing, or maybe even the first thing that you might want to look at when you're looking at wide receivers to stash on your teams. Cooper Kupp is the most targeted wide receiver in the NFL at 69 targets. Nice. Michael Thomas and Tyler Boyd follow him. Keenan Allen and Julian Edelman round out the top 5. Probably the most surprising character in the top 20 or so is a guy that we didn't know what to do with this offseason, Courtland Sutton. With Joe Flacco coming in, we didn't necessarily know if Courtland Sutton was going to be the number 1 wide receiver, especially with Emmanuel Sanders slated to come back to the Broncos. But Sanders has kind of dealt with his own issues so far this year. Courtland Sutton has taken up that mantle, 46 targets, 30 receptions, 477 yards so far this season, with a racer of 0.94 and a whopper of 0.63, which is one of the better marks in the National Football League. What's the value of Courtland Sutton? Is he a wide receiver 1? Is he inching closer to being valued as a top 12 wide receiver? And what are you paying for him right now if you're trying to acquire him? Do you think this is the best time to do it, or is that something that you're probably going to be doing towards the offseason, hoping for maybe a fall off from him at the end of this one?
God. I mean, obviously he's moving up the board towards top 12, but it's just going to be hard to break that top 12 until guys start retiring, until Julio Jones starts to retire, guys like that. So, and then there's still a bunch of young wide receivers there. I mean, it's not like Mike Evans is going away anytime soon. DeAndre Hopkins, OBJ, DJ Moore's right there in terms of most targeted. Keenan Allen's not going anywhere. Tyler Boyd, Kupp, Thomas. So it's going to be hard to break into that. This shouldn't be all that surprising, I suppose, just because he is a second-year wide receiver, and our friend Peter Howard has talked about how second year is the most common year for wide receivers to break out. And Courtland Sutton, with his draft pedigree, with his college production, this should have been an indicator that he would be a lot better in his second season. I mean, it's promising because it's with Joe Flacco. Now we'll see what Drew Lock is. But yeah, I mean, I think he's worth a first round draft pick right now. And that's including the 2020 class, which has some very, very good wide receivers. And I would place Courtland Sutton right now in that round 1 2020 class. So I would think that's his value right now.
So top 5 pick, not top 5 pick. Let's break it down. Let's say number 5 pick. Say you are certain you have the number 5 through number 7 pick in your draft at this point in the season. Are you selling that for Courtland Sutton?
I mean, cop-out answer, depends on team makeup, but yeah, I think I'm okay with that. Yeah,
for me, he's more of a back end first round pick. If I'm confident that my team is probably going to make the playoffs, then I'd be comfortable selling that first for Cortland Sutton. But if I'm going to miss the playoffs, or if I'm likely to miss the playoffs, I might not want to do the same thing. Not because I don't believe in Sutton, just because that quarterback situation is unstable. It could get worse before it gets better because we assume Drew Lock is going to get some time to play as well. If not this season, then next. It's a tough scenario. Kind of just like Baltimore, the other wide receiver spots in that rotation have already been filled, so you know what the competition is there for targets. You understand that Noah Fant's probably going to be used a little bit more in his second season, that we are going to see a little bit more from Deshaun Hamilton, maybe when this team starts to become a higher volume passing team, potentially with a newer quarterback. But I think Cortland Sutton kind of has his role pretty well locked down. He's looking like a very, very good receiver this year. I just don't know if I'm ready to break the bank for him yet, because there's a lot of receivers out there that you can be spending on and get similar value for. So that's kind of my rec, but I really do think that he is still a first round talent pretty easily at this point. But let's, like you foreshadowed here, let's talk about the defensive DVOA so far this season. Everybody's heard about the New England Patriots and how they are absolutely destroying teams on the defensive side of the football so far this year. I think they would rank in the top 20 of both wide receiver and running back, their defense, if you happen to be a league that still uses defenses. But beyond them, the San Francisco 49ers are another one of the top ranked defenses, second ranked DVOA, according to Football Outsiders. Buffalo Bills. Carolina Panthers is one that might be a little bit more surprising than most. Obviously, Chicago Bears, Minnesota Vikings, Green Bay Packers, Denver Broncos, Pittsburgh Steelers, and Tennessee Titans round out that top 10. Now, do we think that with 6 weeks of information that we can trust this data? That this is going to give us some insight on kind of who to start against these teams, or is it still kind of up in the air at this point?
I mean, I've been using it for my start sets, and I've been pretty successful. So, yes, you can use it. I mean, let's just look at these top teams. I mean, New England has shut down everybody on the face of the planet. I think they're holding teams to under 10 points a game right now and under 200 total yards a game. So I would say that's very accurate. San Francisco, they 178 yards between Baker Mayfield and Jared Goff combined. I think that says a ton, or everything that you need to know about what San Francisco's defense looks like.
Number one passing defense. New England actually is the number 2. So San Francisco is better than New England in terms of pass defense.
I lie. I apologize. It's 234 yards per game for the New England Patriots, 8 total points per game average that the Patriots allow.
Yeah,
so
that's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I think these are all fairly accurate. Buffalo's has been fantastic on defense. Carolina's been good against the pass. Chicago is Chicago. Minnesota, yeah, I mean, these are all very accurate. And we've seen a lot of these play out. Green Bay has been vulnerable against the run, but they're very good against the pass. Carolina has been vulnerable against the run, but they're very good against the pass. The Broncos just seem to be well-rounded right now. So do the Bears. Like, I think this is a very good representation. Now that we're 6 weeks in, this gives good data to tell us who should and should not be starting. And it correlates well to fantasy points allowed as well.
DVOA, you can find it on Football Outsiders, completely free. You can find it a few other places as well. But if that's a stat that you we're not accustomed to, yeah, that's definitely a thing that a lot of good writers, such as Snoppy and myself, do take into account when writing our start sit articles and coming up with what these matchups mean in terms of who we should be rostering and who we should be starting on these teams. That said, I wouldn't take it to the nth degree. I wouldn't go to week 12, week 13, week 14 and start looking at potential matchups based on this data, because a lot of things can change the next 5 weeks, and you just don't know what the landscape of the league is going to be towards the end of the season. You're going to have teams that are out of playoff contention that might be playing a certain way. You're going to have teams that might be fighting for a playoff spot that might do some unexpected things as well. So I think a 3 to 4 week buffer is a good range to kind of start to look into the future when trying to come up with what schedules are going to be most beneficial to facing your team, or maybe avoiding starts in some of those spots. But let's talk about schedules. The Bills and the Jets have some of the softest upcoming schedules I have seen recently. This is absolutely crazy what these teams are going to be facing over the next few years, over the next few weeks. Josh Allen, Sam Darnold, do we think they have a second half resurgence? Do we think they use this relatively soft period in their schedules to move up to closer to that quarterback 15, quarterback 12 spot or so?
As much as I hate to say it, and I said it last week, I believe, I think Josh Allen right now is a buy. I mean, he has an extremely soft schedule coming up, and he could be a top 10 QB rest of the season.
When we say soft schedule, ladies and gentlemen, Dolphins, Eagles, Redskins, Browns, I guess, kind of throws that off a little bit.
Yeah,
but then the
they're
Dolphins
still haven't been good.
But then the Dolphins, exactly, and the Browns haven't been great. That's the Bills' schedule, so that's what Sam's talking about.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot more confidence now for the Jets and what they demonstrated against the Cowboys, who have a good defense in their own right. So I do feel good about Darnold, and he might be a buy as well, though his value probably spiked after the Dallas game. But yeah, I mean, the Bills, it says remaining schedule is 13th in terms of quarterbacks, but like you said, they face Miami twice. They face Philly, Washington. Baltimore has, though their secondary is probably better. Pittsburgh has a bad secondary. The Jets haven't been great in terms of the secondary. And then with the Jets,
Jaguars, Dolphins, Giants, Redskins, Raiders, Bengals, Dolphins, and then it rounds out with the Ravens.
Right. So, I mean, Jacksonville just got rid of Ramsey, so they're not nearly as formidable. I mean, Miami, the Giants are top 5 in allowing fantasy points to wide receivers. Washington, Oak, like it's just, if you want to buy for like end of season, though, like the Jets isn't that soft in terms of like week 14, 15, 16, but yeah, I mean, if you're looking to buy low on guys that are going to excel in the second half of the season, Buffalo, like Darnold and Josh Allen are guys to look at.
All right, so we have to settle the discussion. A lot of people are really talking about, I guess, QB wins. This is the same conversation that I have constantly about Jimmy Garoppolo, and people are saying, well, he's a winner. Yeah, but what does that mean for him specifically? Cam or Kyle Allen? Kyle Allen is undefeated in his 5 or 6 starts so far into his career, I believe. Cam Newton lost, I think, the last 8 of his starts. Obviously, this is a hobbled Cam Newton. A lot of people are saying, though, even a healthy Cam Newton wouldn't get his job back versus Kyle Allen. Do you share that notion? Do you think Cam is done?
It really depends on how effective he can be as a runner. I mean, Cam brings a dimension to his game that Kyle Allen that very few quarterbacks can. And you see what Kyler Murray is able to do. You see what Lamar Jackson's able to do. You see what Josh Allen's able to do. But if this foot injury, this ankle injury is a lingering thing, and he is getting older and he's getting beat up and he can't run, you can't rely on Cam to be a pocket passer. He's not a pocket passing quarterback. That's just not who he is. He's not a good passer, really. He's an okay passer. He gets the job done, but his legs are a big reason for that. So I don't know. I think it's Kyle Allen if Cam can't run. And they've been decent with Kyle Allen. It's not like Kyle Allen's playing terribly.
Yeah, I mean, it really could go either way. I don't know if I agree that it's Kyle Allen just because of the body of work of what Cam Newton has done. I think if you're looking towards just these last 8 games or so, Cam Newton has been injured these last 8 games or so. So I don't know if that's a fair shake given what he can do. That said, I think that this gives more time for Cam Newton to rest. I think Kyle Allen's good performances, or at least decent performances, and the team being able to win games despite not having Cam Newton is going to allow Cam Newton to come back healthy when he does come back for the first time in a long time. So I think that there could be some if you have the cojones, if you have the willingness to go out there and to maybe poke around at Cam in a super flex, I do think there might be some accolades for you at the end of the year, or maybe into next year, just when he comes back and when he comes back healthy, because I still think that he'll start over Kyle Allen. That said, if you're going to be doing that, you have to understand the risks with Cam Newton. Cam Newton has a $21 million cap hit next year to just a $2 million dead cap. This year, his dead cap was about $9 million. They decided to keep him on the team. Next year, it drops by another $7 million. So that's something to keep an eye on if Kyle Allen continues to perform as is. But he is technically signed to the team through next season. And in the case that he isn't part of this team, I don't think that that's going to mean that Cam Newton isn't starting somewhere next season. There's a lot of spots that QBs are going to need to fill going into next year. So I don't think that we have seen the last of Cam. I don't think that he's done and dusted. I don't think he's the same player, but I do think that there is still top 15, top 12 talent in Cam Newton's legs if he can just get right for the first time in a long time. All right, we're going to dash through these last 2. Auden Tate has been the waiver wire man of the moment, so to speak. So far this season, we have seen some interesting things from Auden Tate, but just describing him from a profile perspective, he runs a 4.68. He has a 71st percentile speed score when you factor in his size, so size adjusted speed. His burst score is not great. Agility score is not great. Neither is catch radius. But he's been a guy that's been getting it done relatively pretty stable. Pretty stable over the last couple of weeks or so. That I just can't talk right now. He has 4 red zone receptions over the last few weeks. That ranks number 10 in the NFL. His contested catch rate of 50% is number 11 in the NFL. He only has 2 drops. That's 26th in the National Football League. So, I mean, if you're squinting, you can find a little bit of a player here. Do you think Auden Tate is anything worth monitoring? I just think that maybe there is some value here because I don't see AJ Green suiting up and playing for the Bengals again so much after this season, if he plays for them this season at all.
I mean, he's getting a ton of targets. And who else is catching the ball there? I mean, you have Tyler Boyd. I think Joe Mixon's being misused.
8
and
routes
then you have,
again. 8 routes.
Just
not 8 targets, not 8 receptions.
Ooh, Zach Taylor, you're supposed to be running 11 personnel and whatever. But yeah, on Tate 10, 6, 6, 12 targets. He should be on everybody's roster right now. Because there's nobody else that's catching the ball. Now that could be changed next season, like you said, with AJ Green's situation and everything they need on offense. But I mean, when Tyler Boyd's your number 1 and he's probably drawing a decent amount of cornerback 1 coverages, that leaves Auden Tate, and he has been producing.
Yeah, I think he'd be a solid pickup. I think he's just going to one of those guys where you see the opportunity available. Again, the Bengals are going to have access to high picks, so they're probably going to add to that skill position talent, but you would think they would add a quarterback first. There's a chance maybe they do a quarterback and then focus on the defense. There is a scenario where Auden Tate becomes an every week starter. I think that's just something to kind of grab onto and to watch for now. The question, really, I think, in Cincinnati is what are we doing with Andy Dalton? What is Andy Dalton? Do we see Ryan Finley this year? Is he the answer? Do we think that maybe we see a guy that's not on the team, not on their team anymore, like maybe a Jameis Winston or a Cam Newton, a Bengal next season? Do we think that they go out and pick a rookie? What's happening with the quarterback position in Cincinnati?
I mean, I guess I don't know enough about Finley to make a judgment, but he's a 4th round pick. Maybe he gets a chance towards the end of the season. But generally, I don't think you're looking at 4th round picks to be your next franchise QB. And the way they're playing right now, they're probably going to have a top 5 pick. And if that's the case, they can get a quarterback. I mean, you have a decent class coming up. Jordan Love, Herbert, Jake Fromm are in that second tier after Tua. And there may be more after this season, but I think they'll have I think the way they're playing right now, they will be looking at quarterback in the 1st round.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I do think we see Ryan Finley soon. I think he closes out the season. I just don't understand how we continue to throw Andy Dalton out there. You can talk about his first few games being good. I think his first few games were fueled by volume. Outside of that, there's no type of efficiency that we're seeing from Andy Dalton so far this year. And so that is the issue with him. Almost more than anywhere else, efficiency at the quarterback position is something to monitor. Efficiency everywhere else, I mean, it's nice, and it can maybe give you an idea as to who will get increased opportunity moving forward, but opportunity is what you look at everywhere else. For quarterbacks, they have all the opportunity in the world. If they're starting, they're starting. It's the efficiency that you really need to be looking at, and Andy Dalton is not getting it done so far this season. So that's just a situation to monitor. And as a last point here, we're just going to talk about N'Keal Harry. He's returned. He is back. He's on the field now. I don't think that this New England Patriots team is a high enough volume passing team to really support N'Keal Harry on top of Edelman, on top of Tom Brady's quarterback sneaks in lieu of Sony Michel touchdowns that are killing me. Do you think that there's anything to see here for N'Keal Harry this year?
Not with Gordon, not with Dorsett, not with Edelman.
Yeah, it's going to take some injuries to that, I think, to see N'Keal Harry, but it's good to see him on the field before the end of the season.
Now, if we want to talk about a buy low guy going into their second season, N'Keal Harry is that guy. Because like we talked about with Cortland Sutton, draft pedigree, college production, going into his second year with, I mean, we'll see where Dorsett's at. We'll see where Gordon's at, but could very easily be the number 1 outside receiver for the Patriots next season.
Absolutely. I think that's a great call by you, Sam. All right, let's get into this week's Dynasty Diagnostic. Let's plug in the analyzer. Our episode 50, yes, 50 episodes of the Dynasty Diagnostic was submitted by Jacob Klink. You can find him on Twitter at jclinky51. Please be sure to give him a follow. And if you want to be part of next week's show, all you have to do is follow the podcast at Dino Diagnostic. Smash that subscribe button and leave us a review at the link in the description on iTunes and or Podbean. If you want to get to the front of the line, go ahead and give our sponsor, Fantasy Data, a look and let us know that you did. All right, our episode 50 roster is a 10-team Superflex, 6 point per pass TD, 1 point per reception, start 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, 1 tight end, and 2 flex. At the quarterback position, we have Matt Ryan, Kyler Murray, Sam Darnold, Ben Roethlisberger, and Mason Rudolph. Might as well have gotten Devlin Hodges just to make sure that you had that completely covered here. Is there anything to be done at this quarterback room, Sam Snappy Lane?
Well, I would say you could probably trade the combo of Roethlisberger and Mason Rudolph if you wanted to bolster anything here. My friend John Hogue would say, no, you need to have as many QBs as possible because of the situation that we've run into this year. I mean, if guys are desperate and they're willing to give you something for Roethlisberger and Rudolph, I would be doing that in a heartbeat. If you could somehow get let's just say an RB2 or a wide receiver 2, I think I would be trading them right now, because you have Ryan Murray, you have two very young guys. You have Matt Ryan, who's probably going to be in the league for another couple of seasons, another few seasons. So you're pretty much set. So yeah, I would at least probe right now to see if anybody wants a combo of Roethlisberger and Rudolph to try and bolster one of your other positions.
Yeah, you already have everything that you need at QB here. You have a guy that's going to get you heavy volume in Matt Ryan. You have a guy that can get you some yards on the ground, Kyler Murray. And you have another one in Sam Darnold, who I think will be a QB2 come the end of the season pretty easily. Probably one of the higher end QB2s this year. And I think that there's room to grow for him as he continues to get more weapons around him. Ben Roethlisberger is kind of the point for me here. Is there any value in Ben Roethlisberger right now? Do we think that, I mean, he comes back next year, he assumes he's starting role and he's the old Ben? Or, I mean, have we seen Ben Roethlisberger's best days already?
I think we've seen his best days, but I mean, he's still a starting QB. He's probably still a top 16 starting QB, which is going to be extremely valuable in Superflex. And given his backup right now, who has played well and could be the QB of the future in Pittsburgh, I think the combination is where it's at, where I think Roethlisberger probably plays out his contract and then Mason Rudolph's right there to take over when it's done. So you basically have a continuity there, a QB1 for several years.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from with that. Running backs, Alvin Kamara dealing with injuries over the past couple of weeks. Nick Chubb, I mean, he's everything that you have wanted him to be so far this season. Sonny Michel apparently isn't the starting running back in New England anymore. That's Tom Brady moving forward. So that's fun. Devin Singletary and Frank Gore. Frank Gore has said that Devin Singletary reminds him of himself and that he is one of the best backs that has been under Frank Gore so far this season. That is 4 running backs between Gore and Singletary right now that you have on this roster that I think are all the top 30 running backs. I think 2 of those guys are easily top 5. Outside of that, I think that Michelle, Singletary, and Gore are pretty good backups for all of that. I mean, are you going to need to add anybody to this team? I haven't even talked about Jalen Samuels and Chase Edmonds.
Yeah, I actually feel very good about this. I mean, even with Michelle not getting the touchdowns, he's still getting a ton of touches, and that's even with the presence of Burkhead, James White, and apparently Brandon Bolden. God knows what he's doing. But
touchdowns, apparently.
I mean, his lowest carries this season was 9. He's had 15 or more in 5 of 6 games. He does have 3 touchdowns. It's not he hasn't been as efficient, and he's definitely got some touches stolen, and he hasn't been used like we thought he would be in the passing game, but he's still an effective RB2. Like, to have him as your RB3 on this team and have Kamara and Chubb up top, and then you follow up with Michelle, who's just going to give you like 80 yards every game and then score a touchdown here or there. Like, this is a fantastic running back room. And then, like you mentioned, Singletary, who's been extremely efficient, and it looks like will take over the RB1 role in Buffalo as soon as later this season. Samuels has been involved in the game, in the run game for Pittsburgh. Chase Edmonds is a good handcuff to have with DJ, and we saw Chase Edmonds is getting his touches. So this is an extremely deep and good running back room, and I don't think there's anything you really need to do.
Yeah, this is an excellent running back group for me. This is almost even overkill, although I wouldn't be selling any of these players because I think you have a really good setup as is. And I think that you have young players that are going to retain their value for quite a while. If I had to sell anybody, I'd probably be selling Sonny Michel, but you can't do that right now because you probably aren't getting value for him. Probably have to do that towards the end of the season or after a good stretch of games from Sonny Michel, a particularly good stretch of games, not just the solid 80 to 100 yards from scrimmage that we're seeing game in, game out for him. I think he needs to score a touchdown or two before people are going to kind of get their ears perked up for Sonny Michel. But if anybody, he's the guy I'd be selling here. But I don't know why or for what, because I mean, Sam just went out and found the best team that he possibly could and put that as the Dynasty Diagnostic today. At wide receiver, Juju Smith-Schuster, Chris Godwin, Brandon Cooks, Curtis Samuel, Robbie Anderson, Preston Williams, Auden Tate, and Anthony Miller. Look, I'm always the guy to have something to say about people's wide receiver cores. Always talking about having more of those than you think that you need and just being able to pummel people with having those wide receivers that stay in stable situations. Man, Juju, Chris Godwin, those are two extremely young, extremely valuable receivers. Brandon Cooks, you're going to be frustrated, but hey, I mean, he still gets you points every now and then. At the end of the year, he's still going to be a top 18 receiver, probably top 15 receiver. Curtis Samuel, he is probably within a shout of a back-end wide receiver too, getting close to that at this point. Robbie Anderson, we just talked about the Jets' schedule. Sam Darnold coming back. Preston Williams is on a team that's going to have to pass all the time. Auden Tate is as well. Anthony Miller, I don't think you know much about, but I mean, even he showed something last season that prevents you from just flat out dropping him or thinking that he doesn't have anything to offer here. No additions needed at the wide receiver core.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, let's not panic on Juju. He's still extremely, I'm actually going to look him up here. He is 22 years old. He will turn 23 this year, at the end of this year. So he's still extremely young. He's still on pace to be a top 12 wide receiver. He's had 2 bad games in the last 3, but the dude is producing numbers. Like, I don't know what other, you're going to make me start on this rant again, Eitan, but here, I'm gonna do a little bit of math while we're on the show here. Divided by 6 times 16. Oops. Is that right?
Gotta carry the 9. Carry the 9, Sam.
So 16. So he's still on pace for over 1,000 yards. Still on pace for probably 6-ish touchdowns. I'm not actually going to do the math here, but he's still a phenomenal player, and he's still very young, and his QB situation is going to get better. It's not going to be like last week every week. So to have him as your wide receiver 1, I'm fine. But then you have Godwin right behind him, who is the wide receiver 1 right now in fantasy football. Then you have behind him Brandon Cooks, who is a perennial top 16 wide receiver. He's having a down year right now, but he's like the most underrated wide receiver in the game. Curtis Samuel, Eitan talked about, and we like a lot. Robbie Anderson gets his quarterback back, and guess what? Explodes. So, and Preston Williams has shown something with a dismal Miami team. Auden Tate is showing stuff. Anthony Miller, I think, is going to have a breakout in week 7. By the way, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. But yeah, there's nothing you need to trade here. I mean, if you really thought you needed to upgrade somewhere, get a true wide receiver 1, try and trade for Cooper Kupp. I don't know. Try and trade for
just not with me. Just not
right. Right. But I mean, yeah, try and trade for Michael Thomas, Julio, something like, but you don't need to, because you already have the wide receiver 1 in fantasy football right now. You're fine. This is fine.
Yeah, this is great. This is just a great team all around. Tight ends, Travis Kelce, TJ Hawkinson. Again, like, you don't need anything here. Travis Kelce is going to be one of the top 3 tight ends for the next 3 seasons or so, barring injury. TJ Hawkinson, by the time Travis Kelce starts to fall off, TJ Hawkinson will probably start to be coming into his own as the solidified number 2 target out in Detroit after Marvin Jones goes along his way. Again, this is just another position group where you have everything that you need for now and into the future kind of already on this team. I mean, if anything, maybe I would try to go ahead and maybe add a David Njoku to this group just to kind of overkill it. I mean, just so you have the option of trading a Kelsey if something comes along or moving one of those other guys. But yeah, Kelsey Hawkinson, excellent combo. Age ranges match up perfectly. This is just a very, very solid team.
Yeah, you're not gonna. I mean, granted, 10 team, but even in 10 team, this is absolutely. It's got to be one of the top 2 or 3 teams in the league. Like, you're going to be competing for a long time. It's not like, oh, this is a compete now team. This is a compete now, compete 5 years into the future type team.
Yeah, excellent team building here. Excellent team building here. We're not even going to talk about picks. You can figure out what to do with your picks. They're not going to be high because you're probably going to win the title. But that is going to be it for us today. What is our final diagnosis? Sam, what is this to you?
Rolls Royce, Bugatti. Let's name some other stuff. Aston Martin. Yeah. I mean, that's this team. Like, this, a Lamborghini. Like, this is bananas. This team is awesome. And like I said, you don't have to worry. I mean, there's not one position here where you're worried. Because even in bye weeks, you have guys that will fill in admirably. You're not going to be missing like a ton of points. Like, it's not like, oh, it's front loaded and you're screwed. I mean, your depth is fantastic too. So you should be competing for titles for the next several seasons.
Yeah, I mean, this is an F1 race car. This is a Concorde jet. I'm out of cars to describe this. Like, Sam already talked about all the high-end luxury cars. This is an excellent team. This is one of the best teams I've seen in a long, long time. Team building is perfect at every single layer, every single position here. At quarterback, if there was a guy that I had to trade, I think I agree with Sam. It would be Ben and Mason Rudolph. At running back, that's Michelle. We already talked about that. At wide receiver, if you're going to trade a wide receiver, if you have to, I think you're trading Brandon Cooks. But, I mean, you really don't need to do any of those. You have time because all of these guys are relatively young. This is just going to be a very, very solid team this year and into the future. And that is going to round out our show today. That's going to be it. Please make sure to follow your technicians, myself, ETAN Mosia on Twitter. Sam can be found at FF Stompy. You already knew that. Please go to the Dynasty Diagnostic podcast feed on iTunes and give us a 5-star rating or review. It really helps the podcast grow and reach more listeners. Sam, before we sign out here, do you have anything to say?
Yeah, go follow us on, or go donate to our Patreon. We do a lot of hard work every week, and we really appreciate your donations. We're trying to put out as good a content as possible, and your donations definitely help. Go buy t-shirts as well. Go to Shopify / something. I can't remember what it is. Just search FF Pod shirts on the Google machine and look up our pod shirts. We have 2 shirts up, a sticker. This is Dynasty Outhouse's store. They also have Trade Addicts pod shirts, Top Shelf pod shirts, Superflex Super Show shirts, and 10% goes to Fantasy Cares. So it's going to a good cause as well. So search FF pod shirts. I can never remember the store site. And it'll show up. I think it's one of the top 2 hits. And then, yeah, Patreon / Dino Diagnostic.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for making it to the Dynasty Diagnostic Service Center today. Please be sure to keep up with your scheduled maintenance and catch us next time to ensure quality performance. See you on your next visit.